So, the African Nova Scotian Freedom School. I mean, the first thing I think I want to say is that it is a collective project. So I am a dreamer. I had this idea. My children, as I mentioned to you, were already enrolled in the Chicago Freedom School. And I was telling a friend this morning, I really think of it as the project that I needed to throw my grief into, because, you know, my son ran to me on May 25th with his phone in my face and said, Mom, have you seen this? And it was the execution of George Floyd. And, you know, it was just, my stomach dropped out. I didn't want him to watch it. I knew that he had. I hadn't watched it intentionally. And I literally thought to myself, I can't do this. Like, I cannot talk to him about it. You know, a few weeks before that, we found out about Ahmaud Arbery, this beautiful young man running in rural Georgia. And, you know, there were just a circling of executions that were happening. And I thought to myself, I need somebody else to talk to my son in particular about this. And talking about it isn't enough. I need to find some way for that to transform into something beautiful. That execution, which I had no idea on the 25th would lead to the unprecedented times that we are in. But it was just a culmination of all of those things. The kids, you know, eventually being enrolled in the Chicago Freedom School. I couldn't talk about these things. I could sit down, I was teaching at the time, and, you know, every week my children would hear me for hours, like, discussing all of these things with a group of 50 people. You know, in great detail and in historical context, but I couldn't do it with my kids. And so I literally sketched out some ideas about what I wanted the Freedom School to look like. The name just came. And I put together a curriculum, the bones of it, and I sent I picked up the phone and called Dr. Lynn Jones, who is an elder with many, many generations here. And I said, you know, do you have a few minutes? And she said, of course. And I said, what do you think of this idea? And I just pitched it to her, and she let me ramble on for about 15 minutes, and then I pulled back. And I said, okay, I think I'm done. And she said, Rachel, I think it's amazing. And she said, here's a list of people you need to talk to. And that conversation really gave me not only assurance, but permission, permission because I'm not here, my people are not rooted here. And as a community elder, there was, a sacred permission that she gave me. And I just started making calls. And in a few days, I prepared a Zoom call. There were 7 or 8 educators that showed up. And by the end of that call, what was so beautiful is, everybody started going, well, I think I could teach week 1, week 2, no, that's my area of expertise. No, I want to teach week 2, because they had such a kinship already in place as educators who'd been working on a number of other community projects, who, knew each other's families and grandparents and great-grandparents. And at that point, I just shut up and said, well, this is obviously going to happen. And we ended the call with, 2 things. I said, it is important for me that you know that this is our project. When I'm asked, for example, to do interviews, I need to know, who's willing to take those interviews. I want to be decentered from this project, and I want it to always be described as a community project, because it will grow. Yeah. It will grow, it will ripple out, and I have to be decentered. And the second thing that I, just want to say is I'm going to go hustle and get us some money, because you need to be paid for your value and the work that you're doing and the curriculum that you're building. And so it was kind of magical. I didn't expect the call to go, no, that's my week. Yeah. Actually, week 4 is my area of expertise. Yeah.
Well, you said that when we talked last week. You were like, it was kind of crazy how it all came together. And do you remember what I said?
No, not exactly.
I was like, no, that is not
That's
crazy.
not
That is what happens
Yeah.
when you are in your purpose and working with
I do
passion
remember.
toward a
Yeah.
beautiful goal.
Mhm.
The universe just puts those pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle.
I do remember you saying that. I do remember.
So-
and I thought about it after we hung up.
Whew.
You know, after we got off of our Zoom call, I carried that. It made me cry too. I'm
Yeah.
sure it did. you know.
Yeah, I know. It brought you to tears, but for me, that's just the truth of it. It's like deep truth
Yeah.
brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
And this is, I believe that whatever you're doing right now, if you're doing it with a real sense of purpose, everything you've done till now has brought you to this and has prepared you for it. And I think it's going to be amazing. I love the idea. I wanted to help right away when I heard about it, as much as I could in terms of publicizing it. If I can get the word out and get more money, as you say, for the program to be run, and maybe it can just be the start of something
I know.
big and beautiful.
It will be the start. I have already gotten some really beautiful commitments. So one that I'll just share that feels so important is, Fernwood Publishing, has made a very generous gift to the school and has said, we want to be your partner annually. We want to make sure that we show up with a gift every year for you, and we want to donate, books that you need that you can use as texts. And so, that was just really remarkable, really generous. But it will grow. I know it will.
What do you want, if it's your elevator pitch, for instance, what do you want kids to get out of this program? It's a month-long program. What do you want to give them?
The first word that comes to me is grounding. Tears are going to come again. Like real rootedness at this time. We talked on that Zoom about the truth of living in an unprecedented time, the convergence of COVID-19, which I don't think we fully understand the implications of. Anyone that just opens the New York Times for a minute and then slams it shut, right? Because I can barely handle the first page these days, can see those charts where, the red lines are going up, 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 up. I looked at a graph today before I slammed the front page shut that had a chart of, I come from a family of addicts, and it was a chart that had like heroin tracking and then a grid for crystal meth and I think opioid addiction. And the spike from 2010 to this year, where there are almost 80,000 overdose deaths in the United States. In 2010, there were around 7,000 overdose deaths. So in less than, a full decade, we went from 7,000 to 80,000 overdose deaths. And the story was about how all of the overdose tracking right now is off the charts because there are even more people overdosing because of the times we're living in. So I want kids to understand the context of the times that we're living in. And I'm not in conversation with any pocket of people who I think really understand that we're living in times that science fiction writers like Octavia Butler have been translating for us for decades. I remember reading her work decades ago and thinking, this is crazy. We're so far away from this. But now that I'm rereading it, one of the things that's central from the moment you open Parable of the Sower is a narrative about, drug addicts and, running wild in the streets as a means of dulling the pain of the horrific times that they're living in, I want our children to be grounded in an understanding of what we're living in. The fact that the last month and a half, whatever began on May 25th to right now, not only was an undertaking that happened because of what our ancestors did, what folks through the civil rights and the Black Power movement lived through and made possible, but that the world exploded in an unprecedented way because of the singular issue of Black dehumanization and state violence. Like, that's the singular issue. I think I said to you, we don't need a Voting Rights Act anymore. You know, we don't need desegregation in the way that we did during the Civil Rights Movement. And so the issue is really singular. And I want children to understand the ancestral component and what brought this moment to fruition. I also want children here to understand the long history of organizing and activism led by African Nova Scotians, by their own people.
Yeah, which is so empowering.
Yes, and by the people that I intentionally came to this city to learn more about. There's no other community like the communities that African Nova Scotians have created. As an American, you know, I'm, you know, looking in from the outside, and the first thing that comes into my mind when you say Black people Nova Scotia is, oh, that's where Black people went in the 1700s to try to get their freedom. Oh my God, there was this entire community at the time when my father's ancestors were enslaved in Georgia, who were up here trying to build farms, churches, communities, schools, when that was just an impossibility for my father's people. Like, for me, that's the first thing that comes into my body. So I want children to understand that history. You know, I have dreams of like bringing in, you know, some of the things that I'm studying. You know, I'm in the archives digging around. So letting children see their people, their ancestors, and saying, oh wait, we've been talking about this global project, but that global project is right here, and it's been here. And then, you know, the third thing, and maybe it's like a third and fourth combined, is, let me just say this, you know, I went to high school in Baltimore, which meant that when I was a high school student, all of my teachers and all of the kids that I was in school with all day long were Black kids. My high school was probably 90% African American. I went to Howard University for school, which meant that as a college student, when I was, you know, studying, you know, getting my base, all of my professors, you know, the first examples of like professionals that I had before me, and the students who I learned with and am still close to this day, were all Black people. They were all African American. I mean, Howard had Black kids from everywhere, but we were Black. The opportunity to create a space where our babies get to see a mirror every single day and see that we are there because we really love them, right? We're showing up, we're saying, you know, we got other shit to do this summer, but we're here because we love you, is it's profound. I know what representation and having a mirror through my teenage years and through my undergrad years, I know what that mirror did for me. I know how it shaped me, and I want that mirror for our children. There's nothing, you know, I can say lots of things about the way that racism works, but, you know, now that I'm a mother with teenagers, I would say that representation is powerful beyond measure for young Black people. We don't quite understand, and white people don't understand, what it means to live in a world where you never see yourself in the power brokers in society. You never see yourself in a mirror of all of those other human beings who hold power and shape the world. So I want those children to have a mirror, and I want them to be held. And, you know, this is like the third and fourth part, you know, commingled. I want them to go back to school this fall, and I want them to be in classrooms and hallways and courtyards where they can say, you know, I know what happened beginning on May 25th. You know, that execution shaped the world, and my ancestors prepared the pathway for what just happened. Like, I want them to have the language that goes, oh yeah, I know this thing about defunding the police makes a lot of people nervous, but here's what the budget for the Halifax Regional Police is. And I know that even 10% of it could fund 3 shelters for homeless people and provide X, Y, and Z for people that are drug addicted in our communities. So even though it makes you nervous, I know that it's a dream that can be realized. I want young people to to be ready with that language and with those skill sets, because I know as an educator their teachers are not going to be ready, and the students, their friends and classmates are not going to be ready.
But they are activists in training in a way, so they have the opportunity.
Intentionally.
I always say this to my daughter: be a good influence on your friends. Like if you have a friend who's living on the edge, instead of letting them be a bad influence, be a good influence to them, and you're creating this amazing opportunity for these kids to be empowered and to go forward and be activists, which kind of takes my breath away. Also, my breath has been taken away by what you've said about role models, because I think about Wade Smith, who was, I saw his name on your website and it brought a tear to my eye immediately, because Wade was the principal of Citadel High, and we went to St. FX together. And he was just doing such incredible work in his own kind of quiet way, unassuming way. And I feel like the community felt the loss of him so deeply. I went to his funeral, and it was just one of the most profound moments I've had in this community, seeing how deep his roots were and how many people he touched and how many lives he had impacted by being a mirror, by being that mirror. So I'm really appreciative of the work you're doing, and I'm also interested to know about the activists that you have watched. And you've had an activist past, but I want to know who inspired you.
Oh, that's a question. So the first people that pop into my mind are younger people, which is funny because I just finished talking about ancestry. Robin Maynard, who wrote Policing Black Lives, has been a friend and a teacher for years. She has taught me more she's kept me on track with the work that I do around forgiveness and finding other ways to deal with harm, which is a very natural human response to scarcity, without using harm to deal with it or creating more harm. So she has been, she's just really kept me on track and called me in when I've taken some missteps over the last 7 or 8 years. So she comes to mind. In this community, Lynn Jones has been a teacher from Go. I came to St. Mary's knowing about her collection, not knowing exactly what was in that collection, but sitting down with her for the first time and hearing her say, so from the time I was a little girl, I just started opening newspapers and cutting out people that look like me. And that's how the collection started. I wanted to have all my people in my home. And I couldn't believe that all these faces that look like me and my brothers and sisters were in the newspaper. She has really shaped me, and her hand is definitely on the school because she gave me permission, right? Her encouragement from the beginning was very important. Elle Jones, another person who's here locally. One of the things that people don't know about Elle, because she's loud, is that she is profoundly kind and really, really cares about how people feel, but more importantly, when harm happens, she's really curious about how harm can be lessened in an organizing space, in an interpersonal relationship. She has a very soft heart, and I don't think people know that.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have been so impressed with her poetry, but I know that in the past when I've seen her and I felt like, she's got quite an edge and she's so angry, and I've shied away from that a little bit. And that's part of, I was brought up with girls are supposed to be gracious and they're supposed to be friendly and make you feel comfortable and all of that stuff. And I think she just shows up as she is, and she has a lot of fire. And I'm at an age now where I'm getting a lot more comfortable with people's fire. And if you look at what's happening right now in that sense of embodied and disembodied fire, boy, activism has to be driven by fire and passion. And we're seeing both. We're seeing the embodied fire and we're seeing the disembodied, which is the destruction and the looting and so on. But it's interesting for me to watch the white reaction. And of course, that's a huge spectrum. But how many people say, well, yes, I understand you're angry, but why do you have to loot? And for the first time, and I think I'm in really good company waking up right now. And I feel embarrassed that I have woken up in the past 3 months or 2 months as much as I have. Like, I thought I was already awake to racism and wow, it's like,
I hear you. I think a lot of other white folks and a lot of non-white folks are in your shoes, and I think those tears are really good. I think a lot of other people are in your shoes. Something that you said brought up in me. I have rage too. It shows up in different ways. I also have 3 kids who, rage is very limited in its effectiveness with. One, because, my son's bigger than me now, by far. It's terrible. And
you have to wear high heels, so you're still looking them in the eye at that point. I know.
He's, I think, pushing 6'4" now. It's wild. But, my rage is limited, in showing up in a particular way if I really want to raise children who can figure out how to use rage in a myriad of ways, right? But I also think that, one of the reasons I love Elle and have come to love her so much is because I've learned that when we as women, or people in general, look at rage, particularly Black women's rage, which has its own history and, trope behind it, when we look at that human being and we say, what we are coming with is our own internalized misogyny, right? That's it. We're coming with our own misogyny because, one of the things we know about these structures that we live under, we got it inside of us. We got misogyny here, right? We got, anti-Black racism right here. We have anti-indigeneity right here. We've got the history of settler colonialism running through us, right? We have that. And so it's really important to name it when it shows up. Now, there's another trope that runs through Black women's organizing, the trope that says the angry Black woman. But the fear and the rejection that we handhold with is about our respectability politics, but it also is like bolstered by what misogyny has taught us to do, which is to only lean into women who know how to sit with their legs crossed and be angry in particular ways, and be very, very forgiving when people, mess up and talk in a particular way and not let their tones go up too high. And Elle her body doesn't fit into that, so she does make people uncomfortable. But, with all things, to move away from Elle, when those feelings come into us in such a strong way, my mother used to say this all the time, that's not about that other person, that's about you, right? That's about the work that you need to do. And that's about, folks internalize misogyny about who a woman is or should not be,
Yeah, huge.
It is.
And I can't help but think since George Floyd in particular, and I know Breonna Taylor just blows my mind in that.
And folks are still, it's day 45. It's day 45. Folks are still in the street every day in St. Louis. They're still there.
I know.
Yeah.
But I was woken up by George Floyd. And that's when, for me, poetry moves through me. I don't feel I write it, but I wrote a couple of things around George Floyd, and then I wrote a poem about Breonna because it just shook me to my core. And then you start to finally do the reading that, you know, I should have been doing long ago.
Yeah.
And because I felt I was a good ally, because I don't feel like I'm racist, but I really now am tuned into silence is violence. And I am like, if I was a mother, I have boys who are 24 and 22 living in Toronto. I had to send them off, you know, to Toronto. And I thought about the difference, how I would feel if they were young black men. And how much more, I'm a nervous Nelly anyway, I worry about everything with my kids, but how much more I would worry about them, and how much more rational that worry would be. And it's 2020? Like, what?
So why do you think this moment, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but why was this moment so transformative for you, given like the plethora of other videos that came before it? What do you think it was? And for not just you, but for so many people you may know, right?
I think sadly it was, you know, I've talked a lot to different people about the power of television, because I kind of grew up on television, and
it shaped the civil rights movement.
Yes,
it absolutely did. Yes.
But I've witnessed even in my own life how people reacted to me because I was on TV. And how profile on TV buys you. Like I know that people used to, some people in my audience would see me at 5 o'clock, Oprah on at 4, and me on at 5, and so there's like an equation that's made. Oh yeah, Nancy and Oprah are on TV. Oh my God. Anyway, so I really believe television has power. The video of George Floyd was inescapable. And it was at a moment when we were all still.
Right,
we were still. We were introspective. We were, you know, forced
on social media all day.
Yeah, and you know, that poem that I wrote was, imagine if George was your son with that knee upon his throat. And that's what it was. It was like, you could see this human being and this horrific act of total lack of caring about another human being. And that's, for me, that was just, it was like click. And then just seeing the mobilization after that of black and white people together who were coming together and saying,
so many,
no, this is absolutely not okay. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just black people saying that. It was more and more white people going, yeah, I'll jump on this bandwagon right now and realize that I'm really late to the party. But
I mean, Angela Davis has been talking about that so much. I mean, she's another one, right? And Joy James, those two women have really shaped my life in big ways. And one of the things that Angela Davis has spoken about is just what it means for her, now in her 70s, to sit back and watch these protests that have so many white people, either front and center, or like they're showing up every day. You know, I watched, today's day 45 or 46 for St. Louis for Breonna Taylor. And, you know, I just clicked through these 45 videos. There's this beautiful photojournalism, New York Times, of this young man who's in the street every day just recording it. And there are many moments, you know, that 11 o'clock at night, you know, the only kids in the street are these, you know, white kids dressed in all black and ripped jeans, and they're there.
Yeah.
And so Angela Davis has really asked us to, you know, to not lose sight of how many white people are showing up and how many white people are putting their bodies. This feels really important too, not only in the streets, but in the streets at the cost of incredible resistance and police brutality. You know, there's a Twitter guy named T. Greg Doucette who's just committed the last, you know, month and a half now to documenting every single video of police responding to protesters. And I know he's got near 1,000 videos. I mean, these are things that we'll never ever see on the nightly news. We'll never see these on even, you know, social media sites, and he's just collected them. And when you run through these sites, you know, it reminds me of the man, where was he, in Albany, New York, the older gentleman who approached the police officers and was shoved backwards and had his, I mean, so imagine that times 1,000. Yeah. And what you see in these videos that also tells us a lot about this story is so many of the kids in those videos are young white kids, you know, like your daughter, like freshmen who have, you know, been radicalized in this moment and are getting their asses beaten by batons and sprayed in the face. And we all owe it to these kids to watch those videos, to sit in, maybe not 1,000, but it's just been one of the places and tools, portals, that has shaped this moment for me in ways that, you know, I think I know a lot too. But, you know, T. Greg Doucette's sort of collection of videos has taught me more about what I don't know in this moment, you know.
So I didn't know a lot about Angela Davis, I'm embarrassed to say, but when we talked last week, that's the first thing I did afterwards. You said, I am a child of Angela Davis. And I went and Googled her and watched a fair bit of her stuff. I went down that rabbit hole.
Did you watch her as a young woman?
Yes.
Oh, can you believe it?
So she was in her 20s. And just showing
on fire.
Up on fire. That's right. She was she had ample fire. She was an amplifier of that movement. Yeah. And I just felt such enormous respect when I thought about, you know, I grew up with a desire to shy away from controversy and conflict and all of that, and to see someone just be willing to step out and stand up so amazingly for what she believed in and for what was right. And now here she is at 70. In her 70s.
Reflecting on the times. Yeah.
So I want to ask, you know, it's taken so long for this to happen. How emotional have you been in the past 2 months?
Like unbearably so at times, you know. Yeah, unbearably so. I mean, I think, I don't know how I want to answer this question. I mean, in part, my personal life has had just a culmination of very, very difficult events, losses. You know, my father's going to pass soon. But
sorry, I'm going to stop you there because I just want to honor that, and I know you're going to be with him, which is amazing. You're going to get to do that. How do you feel that he's had the opportunity to see this happen before he leaves?
Now you're opening a can of worms, because my father, you know, this is another conversation, but my father, I think had too much dementia in the last month to really be paying attention. Right. And has been too hardened by life and by loss to really stand in the power and beauty and possibility of this moment. So that makes me sad, you know, because I am his daughter. I'm Richard's daughter. I'm Richard's daughter. I think, you know, the best answer I have for you is that emotionally, you know, I grew up as a child of addicts. I grew up in Baltimore. I grew up with violence in the home and outside of the home, you know, going to college in Washington, D.C. I have seen a lot and lived through a lot, but this moment has been, you know, a time when so much has compounded all at once. And I felt myself trying not to lose sight of what COVID-19 has meant for, you know, the very distinct groups that are suffering and dying more quickly than others. That, you know, the best thing that I've been able to do is find other outlets for grief, you know, including the Freedom School. What I have loved about the time, you know, I think that's my, you know, what I'll say is that, I mean, that has been my process, and I think so many of ours as well. It has been unbearable at times to live in the last 3 months or 4 months And if we haven't felt ways, you know, to stop that go, 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 and like drop into life and soften, I think that the threshold is just too much, that if we cross it, or we, you know, if we cross it, we could break, you know? There's something about this moment that, you know, my instinct is to go, 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 go too, right? That's very much my instinct. I've been taught that to be good, to be successful, you know, it's less important to feel and be, and more important to go, go, go.
Productivity equals value. Yeah. Productivity equals value.
Yep.
Yeah.
My productivity has gone down, and I, you know, finding ways to soften and drop into the present. I mean, that's been the work. That's been the work. But no, the grief has been more. The grief, you know, I was saying this to a friend who came by last night, you know, to just check in on me, because she knows, you know, this trip is going to be hard to Las Vegas, and she was there, and I said, you know, I can't think of another time in my life where there's been like one really hard thing, and then there's a slap of another really difficult thing, and then there's a slap of another really difficult thing, and I haven't fully had time to process either one. You know, I don't even know what fully processed means, but I haven't even been, you know, reckoning in a way that feels like spiritually sound for me with one of those things. And now they're like four. Yeah. And I don't even know how to parent in that well.
Yeah.
You know.
Growing up in the ocean, the obvious metaphor is when you get hit as a little kid by a big wave at the beach, and it takes you down, and just when you're getting up, it takes you by surprise, and it hit, you know, you're down, and just as you're getting up, you get another one.
Yeah.
And that's grief has, grief has definitely felt like that for me in the past when I've been hit multiple times. I know that, gosh, it was about a week, maybe a week or two after George Floyd and the protests had started, and there was a lot of conversation on social media, and I was really trying to be active in and stay in it and learn and be open, and I remember waking up maybe on a Monday morning and feeling, oh God, I'm exhausted. I think I've got to just tune that out now today. And then I was lying in bed still thinking about this, and I was like, holy shit, white privilege. Like, to even think that is like, I can tune it out. And it just made me realize immediately, think about the people who have been fighting for so long, who have been, you know, dealt such an atrocity of unfairness, and they're just in it all the time. There is no escaping it. So that is my, you know, that's been part of my learning. And so it's why I wanted to have this conversation with you and do something and be of service. And
it's good.
Yeah, well,
it's definitely good.
I don't know. I just want to, I want to help in whatever way I can. And what is your hope for the future for your kids? You have 3 kids who are teenagers.
Just that they understand the importance of struggle. You know, I think at least once a week about, you know, the older women who've shaped my life. Elizabeth Watson, this woman who I'm studying now I've been obsessed with her story. She was a black woman who was brought here from Boston, late 1700s. She's one of the only black women that we actually have case records about, which from like in an archival context are really reliable records for many different reasons. 1700s, right? Late 1700s. Anyway, her story is of a black woman who was brought here, re-enslaved, promised freedom, re-enslaved. She litigated for her freedom. She was re-enslaved. She came back to the courts. This is an illiterate woman who can't read or write, right? And I know because she signs her documents that I have with an X, right? She comes back to the court and insists on her freedom again before finally being re-enslaved, and she disappears, you know, from the historical records. But her story, you know, for me and so many of the people who've shaped my life is that they have worked for something and struggled for something for an entire life and never seen the fruits of their labor, right? They've never lived Elizabeth Watson never lived to see her freedom. Ida B. Wells never lived to see what an federal anti-lynching law looked like, even though 2 of her best friends were lynched in the South. James Baldwin used to talk about this all the time, that, struggle is, just what you do as a way. Yes, I mentioned this metaphor of living as an act of faith. I mean, for Black people in North America, that living as an act of faith has also entailed a history of struggle, organizing, preparing young people to lead in their communities, right? But I hope that my children, because now they're in their periods where they're like, trying to separate themselves from me, which I know is part of adolescence. What I hope is that they understand that their lives are tied to struggle. And I don't mean struggle in a way of not being able to rest, to be in Cape Breton on a tent overlooking, on a cliff overlooking the ocean.
You can see the light at the
I
end
see
of the
it.
tunnel
I
right
see
now,
it.
can't
I'm
you?
there.
You're doing
I'm there
it.
already. I'm there. But I want them to know that their existence has been made possible by folks that have come before them. Before my son decided to come to Halifax Grammar, it was a long process for us. It was a long process. We had a dinner, and I called all of my friends that I have here, about 10 of us, into the room. We had a dinner, and I prepared them before they came by saying, this dinner is for Ade. We've made this choice as a family, and what I've spoken to him about, and I need you to speak to him about, is that if he accepts this place at Halifax Grammar, which will put him into relationship and a certain kind of advantage with children that are in a very different class group than he would otherwise be with. Mm-hmm. He will have access to a very specific kind of learning that is very different than this public school he would have been at, right? That is a set of privileges, and from the moment he steps in the door, he owes back. He owes back, because that opening the door and stepping in that beautiful building every day, that's a privilege. Mm-hmm. And so we had that dinner, and everybody came and took turns going around the table that night, and just talked to Ade about what responsibility he had in that school. I mean, part of that responsibility for Black children is hearing other folks say, those are not your people, we're your people. Don't get caught up in rich whiteness, mm-hmm. Don't get caught up in the allures of wealth, yeah. Right? We are your people. Some of those people will be great friends, and others will not. But the allure cannot let you lose sight of where home is, right? Mm-hmm. But that was important for us. I hope my children just understand struggle, not as a burden, but as a responsibility.
You're going to make me name drop, because when I interviewed Oprah, to bring her back into the conversation, sitting on her set in Chicago, the thing that she said to me that has stuck with me almost every day, honestly, since, was, from those to whom much is given, much is expected. Mm-hmm. And we are all, we're all blessed in some way and given something. Yeah. And I want to take that to you, because you've said mm-hmm. you were a child of addicts. Mm-hmm. You were mm-hmm. Surrounded by addiction. Mm-hmm. What do you attribute mm-hmm. your strength mm-hmm. and goodness and outlook mm-hmm. on the world?
So there was a lot of love in the homes that I grew up in. It was more corrupted in my father's home than in my mother's home and with her people in central Pennsylvania. But I still think about that. I think about the way that people in this tiny little community in central Pennsylvania really showed up for one another. When my mom was dying of cancer, she really wanted her kitchen done. We had a tiny little bungalow house in this town, and she couldn't stand her kitchen ceiling. And so there were just men that showed up one day and did my mom's kitchen. And I had never experienced anything like that before. I was much younger then, but what I learned as I became an older woman and mother is that's how people roll in that community. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wanted to roll like that too, even though they were white people. That's how I wanted to roll like that. So my life has been shaped by the love that I had and having access to white people that rolled like that, which is an experience that a lot of us as racialized and Black folks don't have, you know.
It's all about love, isn't it?
And then representation. The high school that I went to and the choice to go to Howard University over Yale, over NYU, where I had acceptances, over, you know, other really good schools, was intentional, and it prepared me in ways that, you know, I've only recently began to understand. Really set me up for life. It really did. It really did. Yeah.
It also, so the visual I get when you say that is it put you on the shoulders of the people, you know, who you've talked about, like Angela Davis, so you could stand on her shoulders, so that it could prepare you to have others stand on your shoulders. And that's sort of, I know it's a collective, this program that you're running, but that's what you're all doing, right? You're giving these kids an opportunity to boost up and stand on your shoulders and be part of that whole system of people who've allowed for that to happen.
I mean, I hope that's what they feel. You know, if nothing else, you know, back to love, I hope that the kids who show up at the Freedom School this summer feel how much we are excited to see them every day and how much we really care about them, you know, whatever they bring our way, you know. Yeah, those are powerful tools to give to young people.
Unconditional love. And you know, there's the idea that there's really only there's this course called the Course in Miracles, which I've never studied, and actually getting into it deeply doesn't appeal to me, but I love the premise that everything is fear or love. And you can look at everything, every reaction someone makes, and racism and what's happening right now around anti-Black racism, to me, is fear and love. And the people who are abhorrent to me, you know, who I see represented in video clips in the States, and I'm not saying that there's not racism in Canada. I'm that's one of the big lessons for me in this, but that's about fear, and it's deep seated and ugly. But if we can all just lean toward love, and you know.
And you know what I've learned about that fear too, Nancy, is that, you know, I feel like I grew up with exactly what you said, but it's taken a lifetime to understand that fear is very specific. It's a fear not of the other as much as it is a reckoning with one's own inferiority.
Boom!
And a reckoning with what it would mean to have that other human being have more than you have.
Oh yeah.
Or even be recognized as equal. It's a fear of the awareness of having to say, I really am not shit, you know?
Yeah.
I really am not so powerful, you know? I mean, that's why these conversations, I mean, that's why, you know, class is so important when we talk about, you know, what race is as a structure.
Yeah. It's like a caste system. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about, that people, and this includes, you know, people who had slaves, like, and people who keep that sort of mentality now, it's like their not enoughness, you know, their deep-seated insecurity and feeling that they are not enough is served by being able to look down on someone else.
So I will tell you that
and be better than them.
I have resisted reading Robin DiAngelo's, what is it, White Fragility.
Yeah.
I have resisted it. But this podcast that Krista Tippett just completed, you know, she won me over because she starts off by saying, I grew up poor. My earliest childhood memory is going to school and having my teacher hold up my hand in front of the class as an example of bad hygiene. Oh, I was dirty. My mother was a single mother. She couldn't keep us clean. She worked too hard. And even in all of that, I knew that I had an advantage over my black classmates.
That's it.
And the black
That's
people in my community. I knew
Oh, truth
that
bumps.
I was better than them. And I said, we need more of that. We need more of that.
Yeah.
You know, we need more people to say, to dig deep and say, I grew up poor. But my sense of who I was, any backbone that grew in me, grew at the disadvantage of the black people that I was surrounded by. Because I could always rely on the fact that I believed they were worse than I was. That's what gave me that backbone. And it's profound.
That's truth telling.
Let me tell you.
Like,
I said, okay, Robin, I'm going to read this book. I'm going to read this book.
So that's we should say that's On Being, the
On Being.
podcast, which I am such a huge fan of, Krista Tippett. And the guest was
Robin DiAngelo
Yeah.
and Resma Manicum, who
Okay.
is a profound somatics therapist who has trained frontline organizers for years in Minneapolis. He's something else.
Yeah. You're something else. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, it's about, for me, it's about recognizing that whoever is in front of us is something else. And we don't always see that in ourselves. And as we age, I feel like that's what we're called to do, is
yes.
recognize our own light.
I love
you know,
that.
it's
Yeah.
that light. We turn up our dimmer.
Yeah, that's
And-
the most exciting thing for me about getting older, is that dimmer, I get to turn that dimmer up.
And
I didn't do that in my 20s and 30s.
Right.
Yeah.
But as you turn up your own dimmer, you can then celebrate the light in others and not be jealous and not resent.
that,
And
yeah.
I can see that. That's truth telling. I can see in my past iterations seeing women show up bright and shiny and going, well, who does she think she is? And that
Internalized misogyny again.
that's
There
it.
is. Yeah.
That's it. But I'm saying let's be large.
I love that.
Let's be large. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to turn up my dimmer. I know I have fantasies of like what 70 looks like already. I know.
Oh yeah.
I do. I love that. I love that metaphor. It's so beautiful.
It makes aging appealing.
And people, you know what? A lot of people don't age that way.
No.
A lot of people believe that a lot of women believe their best years stopped around 27. Can you imagine?
I wouldn't go back to 27 if you
Me
paid me.
either. Not my body, my breast, nothing.
Nope.
Nothing.
Breasts.
Nothing.
Well, maybe my no.
Oh,
Nothing. You're
I'm
right.
in it.
No, I'll take 54
Yeah.
any day.
Yeah.
Any day. So, and that's just about being grateful for where we are and who we are and what we know and feeling our own life.
I know. I wish we could have started backwards. What would life be if we started like at 90 and went backwards?
Benjamin Button.
Our 20s would be fun.
Yeah.
You know?
Wouldn't they? Oh my gosh.
We wouldn't have had a world shaped by violence and date rape and all of these other things. If
We'd
we
be
had aged
so-
backwards, man.
So in our power. Yeah. But you know what? I think we'll do well going this way too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for this time.
Yeah,
This is
awesome.
beautiful.
Is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
I mean, I feel like we need a whole conversation about, this CBC I've been working on this project with them for a few months. It's like a 5-series, probably podcast on basically race in Nova Scotia. And it's a series of themed conversations that we sort of sketched out. And I just feel like there's a need for a space for a deep dive that's multi-subject, that travels around Nova Scotia. I told you I just got back from Digby, and I was walking through Bear River thinking about Peter Wheeler, being lynched and just what kind of impact. I know people in that coffee shop that I went into know that story of Peter Wheeler. Because only people that live in Bear River are people who've been there for generations. It's a tiny little village. And so, Brian Stevenson in the United States set up the Lynching Memorial in the South. And what he's done is he's gone back to every single community and gone to the exact site where a person was lynched, set up a marker, and taken dirt from that site for his museum, you know?
Oh, wow.
And I just was like, we need something, because for him, it's about not only honoring the blood that's underneath, you know, that dirt that's there, the sacred marker, but it is about forcing that community to have a conversation that ripples out, you know? Like, you can't wash things away when there's a memorial in your little village in front of the coffee shop for Peter Wheeler, right?
And a grounded conversation,
Yeah.
Excuse the pun.
Yeah, yeah.
When you were talking about people coming to Nova Scotia in the 1700s, I thought about the fact that, you know, this was the promised land, right? Like
for white and black people.
Yeah,
that's right.
But so many black people got
Such a
here,
beautiful point. Yeah.
and still it didn't turn out to be the promised land. And then, you know, some went to Sierra Leone,
That's
which was
right.
the promised
That's right.
land. And I just feel like I would love to see. I would love to see Nova Scotia become the promised land now for black people in North America or around the world. And I would love for Nova Scotia to step into a role where we brought tourists here. We bring tourists here because they want to see,
place in the world. Yeah.
because we want to see how we turned ourselves around.
Okay.
How we represented the promised land and we failed.
Right. So
And then we said, after George Floyd, we said, okay, now, guess what?
Let me just tell you one thing that has made me hopeful, and I didn't mention this earlier. Man, when I go through, so our fund is at about $280,000, right? I came to this place knowing the Nova Scotians were poor people, you know, except for the folks that live in the South End and a few other parts of the city. Nova Scotians were generally poor people, which was really attractive to me because my mother's people were poor people, right? The guys that came to build my mother's kitchen were builders. That's what they did. That's why they came in one day with like materials. And they probably got them free off job sites, you know, for things they didn't use. But when I sit down, I've been just doing spreadsheets of the donors that have given into this $280,000 pot. Nancy, they're all Nova Scotians.
Yeah.
And they're Nova Scotians who've come back 2 and 3 times with $20, $50, $15, $5. They're not just one-time givers. And so
This
for
is
me,
for what program in particular?
So the fund that I set up on March 17th was to provide $100 funds to Black community members. They had to use them for groceries, medicine, you know, diapers. The only condition that we made is that it was for something you needed, right? Something you needed. And, you know, we're 10,000, 20,000. I was thrilled when we got to 20,000, 30,000. I was jumping up and down. Then George Floyd died. And the fund just took off. And I started getting all these notifications into my email. Anyway, we'll be at $300,000 soon. We're not, you know, we have 250 more transfers to give, and then we need to meet as a community and talk about what other possibilities exist. Buy a building in the North End, you know?
Yeah.
And make a beautiful youth space. But what gives me hope is that those people are Nova Scotians, right?
Yeah.
So there's a story in that giving. There's a story in all the possibilities that exist around what, you know, the story of Black people in Nova Scotia is a story about economic disadvantage. You know, the 500 Jamaicans that were sent here as punishment in 1796 to work were sent here and encountered, first and foremost, the fact that they couldn't work in these other industries that they thought they could work in. So in 4 years, they were like, I can't deal with these white Nova Scotians who keep discriminating against us. But the story of African Nova Scotians is a story of economic, you know, segregation and disadvantage. And so the fact that all these people are not only given to the fund shows a kind of generosity that I think there's a need for a story about, but the opportunity, the possibility to tip something economically for African Nova Scotians is in this moment, right?
Oh yeah,
Right,
it's a
because-
sweet spot.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot. It's a sweet spot because healing is, shows up in a myriad of forms. But, the history of gentrification in the North End, the history of segregation, on every prime piece of real estate on the peninsula, right? Like Black people could not live down here. They could not, right? This bridge is an intentional dividing line, right? Africville was an intentional community that was washed out because that's a multi-million-dollar piece of land right there. There's a possibility in this moment I'm still thinking about with respect to what does it mean to just, give in a direction that can create institutional growth. We know that the middle class was shaped by equity. If you can't own shit or get a mortgage, then you can't grow a middle class, status easily because you have no equity, right? We know that property is what creates wealth. So anyway, I'm just thinking.
It's the opposite of compound interest. It's compound disadvantage.
Yeah.
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 Huh.
There you
And
go.
it makes me think of the fact that I do think there's a sweet spot right now for sure.
Yeah.
But that makes me think of friends of mine who have gone through very difficult times with with illness and that sort of thing, where people around want to help. They want to do anything they can, and it's as much for themselves, really. I've been in this situation where it makes me feel better not to feel totally helpless, and I think that's true for this kind of fundraising. Like, people like me want to make a difference, and they want to not feel helpless in the face of this reality of the horrible, effects of racism and the legacy. And so if it means that, giving some money can help me feel a little less helpless, take the money and run. Yeah.
I hope.
it's
I mean,
fantastic.
what I hope is also happening though is the learning.
Phew.
The learning. Robin DiAngelo, asked this question when she says, when white people ask me, what can I do?
Yeah, and I want to say, I don't mean that I want to give
No,
money
no.
or I want people to give money and
No,
say,
no,
there,
no.
I did everything.
No,
I'm
I
just
get
saying
that.
it's a good opportunity to also get the
Yeah.
money and their action.
No, that's
But yes,
right.
sorry, I interrupted. But
That's okay.
I felt like I needed to say that.
I understand. Anyway, what she says back is, how could you not know, right?
I know.
How can you not know? And so I feel like the other beautiful thing in this moment is just the opportunity to study, to learn.
Yeah.
To grab up these books, to create reading groups with our girlfriends, I'm doing some really cool teach-ins, over the next couple of weeks. One with all the teachers in the Freedom School who are really unfamiliar with defunding the police. So I'm like, I can do a teach-in, let's learn together.
Yeah.
We need more of these popular education spaces because we need to learn together right now.
Yeah.
As much as we're giving of our time and money, we need to be learning with the people that we're closest to and community with. Because this moment has been a bright shining light, that Robin DiAngelo's question, brought to the surface. Like, how could you not know?
I know.
So
I know.
let's study together.
And
Let's learn.
Part of my answer to that is, it goes back to that, before we started talking today, we were chatting about my friend Anne Bay's book, Be, Feel, Think, Do, and how most of us are doing all the time and busy, and it affects our frenetic thinking and so on. But if we can commit to being, and really, we talked about how in the stillness we saw what happened with George Floyd and others, and it impacted us differently. But I think that we all go about our lives in such busy ways, and we don't, we've got blinders on, this is my life, and we don't consider the wider experience of society as much as we should. And so I think that's a big part of when I ask myself, how could I not have known? How could I knew, but I didn't know. I didn't understand the depths of it. And I thought it was mostly in the States. I thought that was the swamp problem in the States. And I feel grateful that I feel grateful that this has woken me up, and I will always honor George Floyd.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's very beautiful. I feel like I will too. I think how can we not? There is, today I was just reading, today was my okay, I'm gonna do some news day again.
Yeah.
I mean, it was last night. And now the full body camera of the officer, Derek Chauvin, has been released.
Yeah, I can't do it.
And what we should pay attention to, because this is the story, is from the moment that the officers approach him in the car and utter this very harsh response. They don't approach him with a "what's up?"
No.
It's like, screaming and yelling commands, and he puts his hands on the steering wheel. This is before he ever leaves his car. He starts to have a panic attack, and he starts to cry and starts to beg. And he said, "Please don't kill me." That's in the first minute or two of the encounter. And I think, for folks that have not watched that video, which is totally fine, our history of rapid violence for Black people is in the first 2 minutes of that encounter. Where a man who's a beautiful, beautiful man, grown man at 6'6" can be reduced to tears in a panic attack.
Calling for his mother.
Before he's ever dragged from his car. It's profound. I mean, when I got to LA for law school, I was driving one night through a fast food, restaurant, and there was a Black man, in my passenger seat, and I'll never forget his reaction when a cop car pulled up behind us and put his signals on. I watched a grown Black man, slouch, and I watched his body do something very different than I'd ever known it to do before that moment. So, I think that, I was thinking about the not knowing question, and, there's a whole history of segregation and a whole history of how we've shaped communities, intentionally with the belief that they're better and safer, and they're better and safer really for one or two primary reasons. They're better and safer because Black people don't live there in mass. Brown people don't live there in mass. Those Muslims don't live there in mass. And they're completely segregated from the spaces where we would have grown up knowing exactly what a Black man's body does when it encounters police, right? Unless you're in those communities, the rigidity and the framework with which those communities of segregation have been shaped over decades will forever prevent you from knowing, But I was next to that body. I watched it, I was only in my 20s then, and he was older. But I'll never forget it,
It gave you a visceral
it was like,
lesson.
And I was cocky. I was like, "Why are you pulling me over for? Don't you be pulling me over?" And he was like, chill. Chill.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I can't tell you how grateful I am for this conversation.
Me too.
Let's keep it going.
Me too, yes, let's keep it going. Thank you.
What do you need from people for this program?
I need, so
this is your chance right now.
Right,
Go.
so in addition to funding,
yeah,
I want to make swag bags, for the kids at the end of the school. I want them to have maybe, a $25 gift card from Foot Locker. I want them to have swag bags. I want them to also have their school supplies. So, one of the things that we need are for folks to just hit up vendors in our community who have been so generous. Could you donate a $25 gift card for, I don't know, a t-shirt or towards gear, swag that you have in your store? These are all going to go in a gift bag for these 50 kids in the Freedom School this year. So I want kids to have things that they need, right? I want them to have their school supplies, and I just need people to help with that. It's laborious. Some of these kids are going to need laptops and pads. So we need folks in the community that can show up and say, "I've got 3 Chrome pads for you. I've got 5 Chrome pads we could donate to your school." We need that. We need that. We need folks who would love to help plan the graduation ceremony and cook some good food, and and come over with some good food. And then not most importantly, but we'll need folks who come out and say, what can we offer you for next year? How can we make this a space that serves Black children, but can we create a space for all kinds of other children too? Maybe we don't need to all mix and be together, but how can we grow this project so that it becomes an annual summer program, the community gives to make sure kids go back to school with what they need, and that other children can participate in, and those are things we need.
And it's not just about making this program stronger, it's about the community. Not just that community, but the broader community.
Right.
And that it will strengthen the broader community.
Absolutely.
And it's just good for all of us.
Absolutely. I mean, it is not coincidental that the folks who showed up on that first Zoom call for the Freedom School were not only people who had grown up with Wade Smith, but they were all people who had come through one learning group, the Cultural Awareness Group, right? That David Woods set up, that there's a documentary about. That is not coincidental. The ripple impact of this kind of program will be wide and deep for many generations. I know that. Yeah, it will be. I have witnessed it. I know.
Can't wait.
Me neither.
I can't wait to watch what you do next.
Oh, that's it. That's it. I need to get through adolescence.
Now you've earned your vacation.
I've earned it. I can't deal with 3 mouthy children at once. It's hard to deal with one.
Believe me. I hear you on that.
And we want them to be mouthy, just not towards us all the time.
Isn't that funny? We want them to stand up for themselves. Yes. And you're right, their whole job as teenagers is to separate themselves so that they're ready to leave when it's time to leave. But it's one of the great lessons of our lives as mothers
it's so painful.
to be in that and support them without squishing them, without using shame and all those tools that were so handy in past generations.
No, I do want them to stand up and be loud and be mouthy and argue their point.
Just not to me.
Not always.
Not to me.
Not always.
Have a good vacation.
Oh, I will. I can't wait.
All right.
Thank you for this time.
So,
this was very beautiful. Thank you so much.
Don't you think?
Oh,
It was good.
so beautiful.
It was, I loved it.